Hey everyone, happy Monday. So, we have some actually really horrible breaking news that came in yesterday afternoon, where there was a terrorist attack at the Pearl Street Mall in Boulder, Colorado. So, there was a peaceful event that was organized by a group called Run for Their Lives, and it advocates for the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas. And from what I could tell so far that we know, there was a man identified as 45-year-old Mohammed Sabri Solomon, and he allegedly used incendiary devices, including Molotov cocktails and a makeshift flamethrower, to assault the participants of the event. And witnesses reported that Solomon was shirtless and shouted phrases like Free Palestine and Zionist during the attack. And six individuals aged between 67 and 88 sustained burn injuries, and there's at least one victim in critical condition. And this comes after the shooting that just happened on May 21st that occurred outside the Lillian and Albert Small Capital Jewish Museum in DC. And that resulted in the deaths of two Israeli embassy staff members, um, Yaron Lachinsky and Sarah Lynn Milgram. And in that case, the suspect was 31-year-old Elias Rodriguez, and he was also shouting "Free, free Palestine" when he was apprehended. And that's the same phrase that we hear at all of these protests on college campuses. So, I mean, this is just escalating, and what a horrible, horrible thing to wake up to.
Yeah, it was really sad too. One of the victims who was injured at the rally in Colorado, I think it was the 88-year-old, was a Holocaust survivor.
Oh,
So that's like
God.
double awful. And then it turns out that this Solomon guy is an Egyptian national who overstayed a tourist visa that was issued to him during the Biden admin back in 2022. And then when his visa expired and he was here in the country illegally, he filed a claim for asylum and then was granted temporary work authorization by the Biden admin in March of 2023. But that permit expired in March of this year. So he's been in the US illegally ever since March of 2025. And fortunately, he was apprehended at the scene and the FBI is investigating his background. But like you said, we're seeing an increase in violence with these anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian extremists. And it's pretty scary, especially when you take into consideration that we have no idea how many terrorists like this are in our country due to Biden's open border policy. And this is not an isolated incident. Like it's part of a very disturbing pattern of increasing ideologically motivated violence. And it's all linked to, this pro-Palestinian extremism that has been encouraged and promoted by the unhinged liberal left. I mean, look at the years of unchecked protests that took place across university campuses under the Biden admin in support of these literally crazy radical movements, but the guise of activism and free speech and tolerance. And it's like anyone who speaks out against it is called racist or Islamophobic. And meanwhile, these pro Hamas and pro Palestinian rallies for the past few years have just become recruiting grounds for indoctrinating young people into these jihadist ideologies. It's total brainwashing, especially when you have, unstable, easily impressionable students and young people. And this is what, like the third terrorist attack we've had in our country since the beginning of the year, because first, it was that ISIS supporter, Jabbar, who drove the pickup truck into the crowd on Bourbon Street in New Orleans on January 1st. And that guy killed 14 people and injured 57 others. And then you just mentioned the gunman who opened fire on the two Israeli embassy staffers outside the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. And this isn't isolated to America either. Like this shit is going on all over Europe. And it's to the point where every time I open my phone, I see a new travel advisory that's being issued to tourist destinations. And my husband and I were just looking at planning a trip to Denmark because we want to do like one last adventure before we leave here in July. And then I see it's been elevated to a level 4 out of 5 travel advisory for terrorism. And, I've talked several times on this podcast about just stumbling upon these major pro-Palestinian protests with thousands of people when I've been traveling in different cities and countries in Europe. And so, like, this is a global problem, and it has to do with unchecked immigration. And FBI Director Kash Patel and Deputy Director Dan Bongino, they both gave statements about this latest attack in Colorado. They're confirming it was a targeted terrorist attack motivated by this ideological violence.
And I just heard about this late last night, so I haven't had time to really see what's being said out there, but I want to hear from all of the media that's been just bashing Trump for taking away funding from places like Harvard for having these protests. I want to hear what they say now. I mean, they've all been cheering this on, and this is what happens. These lunatics think it's okay and think they have free reign to go and commit these violent attacks. And, at this point, it's like own up to it and start condemning this shit instead of allowing it to run rampant on your college campuses. So I hope it's a wake up call, but unfortunately, with the left, like nothing wakes them up. So I mean, we'll see, but just horrible
I
news.
I think it's going to have to be something much bigger than this for
Yeah.
the left to even blink an eye. I
Right.
mean,
I
I'm
mean,
sure
this
they
guy
think
was
it's
lighting people on
justified.
fire. It's like,
Yeah,
but you're right. Like that's not going to be big enough for them. It's
no,
insane.
no. And I also don't think this is the last one we're going to see. So
Yeah.
I'm sure there's going to be more. And I want to kind of transition this conversation into the FBI because I want to get your take on this. And I think in our conversations, we've realized we were both very excited when Kash Patel became the FBI director and when Dan Bongino got the deputy director spot, because they have both been very outspoken about FBI corruption and illegal surveillance and the deep state. And, they both made a point that they would be totally transparent and release all the evidence about the Epstein files and January 6th. And you're going to clean up this corruption in the FBI. And I do think they are doing some really good work. Like, I really do. But since they've both been in these positions, I honestly think they've been falling a little flat. And you guys may have noticed we haven't really talked much about information being released by the FBI because most of it is less than exciting. In fact, it's actually been underwhelming, which has been very disappointing to me because I think both of these guys basically built their reputations by speaking out against corruption and against the Biden admin and challenging, all this shit in the FBI. So I don't know if I just expected more bombshell information or what, but they have built this we're transparent, but we're not learning anything new. And last week, Dan Bongino emphatically said that there was zero evidence of anything nefarious related to Epstein's death, and that it's clear he committed suicide, and that there's video showing there's no way anyone else could be involved. And he said there's no audio, no DNA, no fingerprints, no suspects, no accomplices, and the FBI hasn't received any tips that would lead them to think it wasn't a suicide, which is the complete opposite of the narrative that he had on his podcast for the last few years. And in this interview, he talked about how they're cleaning up the tape from the surveillance video to make sure it's enhanced before they release it to the public. So I was listening to Megyn Kelly's podcast this weekend. I think it was her Friday or Saturday episode. And she had Glenn Greenwald on. And they were talking about how this is a little fishy. And Megan is actually friends with Dan Bongino. And she was saying, like, it doesn't take that long to clean up surveillance video. And even though she trusts him because she's known him for so long, she doesn't really know Kash Patel, but she doesn't think we're really getting the straight scoop from either of them about what's going on. And Greenwald kind of agreed. And I was thinking, yeah, I completely agree as well. So I want to play this clip from that episode and then tell me your thoughts on this, Stephanie.
We've had a lot of client lists released and the like. Was Jeffrey Epstein working with or for foreign intelligence agencies or domestic intelligence agencies? And if they have 1,000 or 5,000 videos of Jeffrey Epstein having sex with minors, feel free to go watch those. That's not what people are interested in them. Why can't they first release those documents about who else, to whom he sex trafficked children, given that nobody has been charged with receiving the sex trafficking, only Epstein with the sex trafficking. Those are the kinds of things that I don't think we're getting very persuasive answers from. And Pam Bondi's excuse, oh, we have all these sex tapes to go through. That's not relevant to either of those questions. Go through those sex tape over years, but in the meantime, give us these relevant documents that you promised very vocally that when you got into power, you would give us.
It's starting to smell, for sure. Like, when they both gave a joint interview, Dan and Kash, and they were like, no, he committed suicide. They looked like hostages. They have the disadvantage of us having heard countless hours of Dan in particular speaking extemporaneously and from the heart, and he is an honest guy, but there's certain limits to how honest you can be when you're holding these positions. And I had the same reaction that a lot of people had, which is he looks like he's not being fully transparent. What do they know that they don't want us to know? And this is the best theory I've heard, what you just espoused, that it's something having to do with Jeffrey Epstein's ties to intelligence, and that would be something they'd have to keep covered potentially, and they don't. They can't say it. They can't be.
Well, it's something we should know, though.
To be.
They would keep it covered, but it's something we should absolutely know. And
absolutely,
I think
but they won't tell that.
Exactly.
What if he's our asset, right? If he's our asset, like they're not going to run around saying he was our asset.
Or an ally's asset, or we should just know that is I mean, Jeffrey Epstein committed some of the most grotesque crimes involving huge numbers of American elites over many years. We should know the answer to that question. Was this an intelligence operation at the beginning or at some point in the middle? And they have those answers and we don't.
Okay. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with this. You know, the thing with Kash Patel and Dan Bongino is they have done so many interviews. Bongino had his podcast. I feel like we know them. Like, you know, you watch someone for a really long time, you see the way they talk, their mannerisms, everything else. And she's right. This was not normal for them. Like, this is not how they would talk when they're about to reveal something. It looked very scripted, you know, like this is what you're supposed to say. And you know, it kind of looked like they were lying. And they know, they've talked about this for years. They know the American people want answers and are counting on them to give those answers. And so the whole thing, I think it just looks super suspicious. And I think they should have just kept their mouths shut rather than said anything at all, because this just looks so bad right now. And so on social media, the conversation is like, oh, the deep state got to them. Like, they're being threatened or something like that. I don't know that I really believe that, because I think if the deep state was going to threaten them, they would have done that a long time ago, especially considering Kash Patel was like head of the NSA. You know, he's been through all this before. I don't think it's that. What I think is what Megan was saying. I think Epstein and especially Ghislaine Maxwell were working with multiple agencies. Like, I don't think it was just the US. I think it was the US, Israel, and probably multiple other countries. Like, her dad, we know for a fact he had ties to the Mossad in Israel. His company is the one that made the textbooks that we all learned from in school. That's not just like a normal job or a normal company. Ghislaine Maxwell owned a submarine company, for crying out loud. Like, normal people do not own submarines. You know, they were very well connected with not just like the elites, but like the governments all over the world. So I think it's absolutely a case where they had ties to these covert agencies. And think about it. If you had someone on the inside, like, just imagine let's just say the CIA, because everyone's familiar with the CIA, and you had someone on the inside that had blackmail on every high profile person in the world. And then you're in the middle of this operation where you've collected all of this blackmail, and all of a sudden that person gets arrested. How do you think the agency would handle it? You know, they're not going to let that go to trial and let everyone publicly see all of the information that they've spent decades collecting. They're going to, you know, either get him out of there and make it look like he died. So like, there's a lot of people that think Epstein's alive and well, living on some island somewhere, or they would just kill him and make it look like a suicide, which, I mean, I don't think any government is beneath doing that. I think they absolutely would if he's a liability. So it's one or the other. But I think it's the only plausible explanation is that they were either informants or agents themselves. And that is why Kash Patel and Dan Bongino can't say shit. They were probably briefed on the whole thing. And this being an operation that was set up by our government, maybe in partnership with other governments. And that's why they're keeping their mouth shut. Like, are they really going to out the government that they're working for? And, of course not. They're not going to be allowed to. So I think at this point, considering not one single client has been arrested, it's been years, we have no information. It's clear it wasn't a suicide, but everyone's lying, including these two. The only thing that makes sense to me is that they were both an agency operative. Like, I don't know how else it could all play out this way.
Yeah, there is also the intimidation factor, and I want to play another clip of that because they were talking about Kash Patel's responses in a Fox interview recently where he was being asked if the FBI knows who the pipe bomb suspect is related to January 6th. And he was like very evasive with that as well. Like he didn't really answer the question. He pawned it off on Dan Bongino and said that Dan was going to elaborate in an interview the next day on Fox and Friends. And then in that interview, all Dan Bongino said was they got a tip and they're going to check it out. And so Megan was like so pissed. And she's like, no offense to Kash Patel, but his response was like, not the truth. And she said, I'm not even playing the clip of Dan Bongino speaking because it was such a nothing response. And she's very adamant about the fact that she is not a conspiracy theorist. So she, she's not like us in that regard,
Yeah.
but she thinks something is going on. And so Glenn was trying to rationalize it by saying that they are under pressure from bigger influences. So I want to play her response to that.
I know you're saying you don't believe in conspiracy theories. This is pretty basic about how the U.S. security state functions. And people who get into office, even at high offices, face a lot of pushback from very powerful factions who don't want things revealed that they had set out to reveal. And no matter how honest you are, no matter how strong you are, like Dan Bongino, I think is, once you get into those positions at that level and you're playing that high of a game, there's a lot of other players involved who are doing things to make you nervous, to make you intimidated, to make you scared, or just overruling you. And that to me is how they seem. Like they know they're not telling their supporters what they want to hear or explaining why they can't. And so it seems like there's other things going on that they're bothered by, almost a little alarmed about, and yet not willing to explain. And that's, I think, what everybody feeling you're getting.
And they definitely have the disadvantage. A lot of people know Kash Patel very well and have listened to him on podcasts endlessly. I'm not one of them, but I know Dan very well. And so it's a disadvantage to Dan because we know how Dan speaks. There's no one more frank. There's no one more direct. So to hear him, try to do the dance a little is like, my spidey senses are up. I love the guy, but something's going on there.
Okay, so I agree. I think they're both right because I do think that we're not getting the whole story on any of this.
I don't either. And there was one part that I saw, and you really have to see it. That's why I'm not playing the clip. And I don't even know if it was this interview or a different one, but it was Dan Bongino, and he kind of he was having a little bit of a moment where you could tell he was pissed and possibly regretting his decision to go and work in the government because he's like, I gave up everything for this. Do you think I wanted that? I had to leave my wife. I haven't seen her. We're in here, all day, every day. And he just kind of goes off on this rant, which was so just, I don't know. To me, it was I felt like he was trying to tell us shit is fucked. And there's nothing we can do about it. And what did I get myself into? That was the whole vibe that I got from him. And it's easy to get when you've seen someone for years and their demeanor, and then it shifts like this. It's almost were they trying to tell us through body language something's not right? The whole thing is just so bizarre.
It's like when Megan said it looks like they're being held hostage because That
Yeah,
is like the facial expressions. And I just feel like to come out and say there's no evidence of anything, it was a suicide, when
right.
there's still all these unanswered questions. Like there's
Yep.
so much about this case that was unanswered, even down to like procedural fuck ups at the jail where the guards weren't performing their mandatory checks and the convenient surveillance camera malfunctions. And even the forensic pathologist who saw the autopsy and said that Epstein's injuries were consistent with homicide and not suicide. So it's like it's a red flag to me that they both changed course on the narrative and that they look so uncomfortable in these recent interviews and these vague, like, we'll have some answers soon kind of responses, and then hyping up, oh, we're going to release all this material, and then it's a nothing when it gets released. I think I just kind of bums me out because I feel like this shows that even in the Trump admin, where we had such high hopes for all of these amazing people in his administration, like nobody in these high ranking positions is really in charge. And like the deep state's control is just so much worse than we thought.
Oh, absolutely. I think if these guys and this administration can't get to the bottom of it and weed out the deep state, then we're screwed. Like this was like the one shot we had, the only hope we had, and it's not looking good. I think definitely in my mind, I think there's a shadow government, whatever you want to call it, with, more money and more power than we can imagine. I think it's so much deeper than, we can even fathom. And when you think about the Pentagon, I know we've talked about this so many times before, but it's like this is a big issue. They have had trillions of dollars go missing multiple times, and they've never had to answer for it. So, do we really think if they don't have to answer to trillions of dollars, taxpayer dollars missing, do we really think we're ever going to get answers on Epstein or the hundreds of thousands of migrant kids being trafficked or JFK's assassination or the attempted assassinations on Trump? It's like they're not going to come out and tell us anything. And so that makes me just kind of wonder if all of these cryptic posts lately from Trump like mean something. Like, are they trying to send us a message without coming right out and saying it? Because the latest one, okay, was this weekend. Trump reposted this post on Truth Social that said that Joe Biden was executed in 2020 and replaced by either like a clone or a robotic double. And we've talked about this conspiracy before because this is like a huge one on TikTok where a lot of people think that was not the real Joe Biden. And I mean, it's not just that he looked different, but little things like the shape of his ears changed. The shape of his head was different prior to 2020. And the Biden administration, they did address this. They said, oh, the reason he looks so different is because he got a facelift. And, okay, maybe he got a facelift, but your earlobes, they don't change like that. Like they might get bigger as you get older, but they don't go from being attached to detached, which happened. And then there's like all the videos about his walk and his posture. Like sometimes he appeared significantly taller and walked in like the same manner as these humanoid robots, while other times he's walking super slow and stiff and he's shorter. And then, of course, like the demeanor, we've talked about this so many times. One minute he's mumbling and confused. And then the next he's giving a speech where he's super alert and articulate. And I mean, remember, we were saying like they must be pumping him with adrenaline or something because his demeanor would just completely change. And like, this isn't the first time that Trump alluded to this. I remember I think it was during the 2020 campaign where he kept saying, Biden, I don't even think Biden knows he's alive. And he would, repeatedly, and still to this day, he repeatedly mentions central casting, which is actors. And so I asked our GPT, like, is this just completely off the wall, or is it actually plausible that Biden could have been replaced, whether it's a body double or a clone, what are the odds? So here's what it said. It said deep fake tech and advanced prosthetics have been used in intelligence and entertainment for years. The CIA has long used body doubles for foreign leaders. DARPA has worked on cloning and synthetic bioforms for decades. That's not sci fi, it's declassified. The idea that the president could be a stand in, biological or digital, is not far fetched in 2025. So I don't know. I mean, why else would Trump post that? Like, do you think he was just making a joke or you think he's actually trying to tell us something? Because there's been a lot of posts like that recently.
Yeah, I hope that he's trying to tell us something. Like, remember a couple weeks ago when he reposted the video about the Clinton kill list?
Yes.
Like, I hope that these are signs that accountability is coming. And this is just so fucked. And I was talking with my husband in the car yesterday, and he mentioned how, like, the whole cover up of Biden's decline was worse than Watergate because we just finished watching a documentary on the Vietnam War. And so, like, Nixon and Watergate were part of the documentary. And so I started thinking, like, this was such a big deal when it happened, Watergate, and how, Nixon tried to cover up the break-in at the DNC headquarters, and the whole thing led to his resignation. And it was like this huge stain on our country. But when you look at that in context of Biden, it just pales in comparison. Like, not just with the massive cover up of Biden's decline and the lies of his presidency, but the entire Biden crime family. Like, Watergate was a burglary. That's it. And there was no evidence that Nixon even profited from it. And it was not a major national security breach, yet he resigned and stepped down. You look at what happened during the last 4 years with Biden, taking into context the alleged, in air quotes, millions in foreign bribes from Ukraine and China, and the DOJ and FBI running interference for Hunter Biden, the whole widespread collusion of big tech and the media and intelligence all suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop story before the election, the mountains of evidence against Biden and his family with the bank records and the whistleblowers and the emails and the boxes in his garage and the car and the child trafficking. Like, we were literally on the verge of World War III with the most massive national security risks with our wide open borders. And then all this shit starts coming out with the auto pen evidence and all the blanket pardons he did for people who still have not yet been convicted of crimes. Like, I could go on, but it's like more and more info keeps coming out about Biden. And there was a new investigation that was just released over the weekend talking about how the Biden admin lied about the dangers of the toxic chemicals released in the East Palestine train derailment from 3 years ago. And you and I fucking talked about this, that they weren't being transparent. And now all this shit is coming out about that. And then my boyfriend, Senator Josh Hawley, he just disclosed over the weekend that a Secret Service whistleblower reported that Biden would get lost in his own fucking closet at the White House. And yet, an entire administration, all of the media and all of the left tried to prop up this puppet, and it was all lies, manipulation, and essentially treason. And it's like the level of corruption that we are seeing here that continues to unfold and be uncovered. It's like nothing I've ever seen before, because I don't think we have ever had such a massively coordinated effort to deceive the American public and literally undermine the democratic process and the foundation of our republic. I mean, we've seen America do it to other countries. I mean, that's
Yep.
something you and I have been talking about for the last year, but it's never happened within our own country, to our knowledge, to this extent. So I don't know if Trump is just being Trump and posting random shit because that's what Trump does, or is there something more to it? I really hope there is. I hope we will see some accountability. I feel like a broken record repeating this over and over again, but I think this relates to what I was saying earlier too about Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. Like, I hope they aren't lying to the American public and suppressing the truth, even though I think they are. And I mean, there's a part of me that just is really hoping that this is part of a bigger plan where good is going to triumph over evil. But the more that comes out and the less we actually learn with what comes out, the more I have doubts.
Yeah. I know. I feel like it's very deflating. And with Biden, it's like you're right. Like listing all that stuff, it's pretty crazy like how much shit they did that was completely shady and that's starting to come out. And it makes me wonder, like, why now? Why now is he talking about his cancer diagnosis when clearly he's had it for a long time? I think that was planned because shit's coming out. And, oh, if there's this poor man that's dying of cancer, the media and everyone's gonna take pity on him or like leave him alone. I think so that makes me think maybe some of this stuff is gonna come to the surface and maybe there will be accountability. But I think this whole thing with Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, it's so freaking deflating. It's like any hope I had just kind of went away,
Yeah.
And I really truly thought this time around would be different with the Trump administration. Like there's enough people awake to fight this evil that's embedded, in our country. But I'm not so sure now. And I think that whole interview that they did, the optics are horrible. And I feel like by them coming out and just saying that Epstein killed himself and the way that they said it makes the Trump administration look really, really bad. So again,
Yeah.
it's like, are they trying to tell us something without telling us something by doing that? Or did they just really fuck up that interview? Because it has made the whole administration look terrible. And it's made me completely lose hope that any accountability will ever happen.
Right. And yes, you can fuck up an interview, but when you have someone like Dan Bongino, who's been a podcaster forever and so bold and outspoken, who's sitting there, you know, pretty much reserved, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it just,
Like, were
yeah,
they
it's
doing like a wink,
wrong.
wink? Oh yeah, he definitely killed himself. Wink, wink. Like that's kind of
Yeah.
how I feel. Either that or they're terrible at acting. But like you said, they've been on video for years. Like they know how to
Mhm.
talk to a camera. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's weird.
I guess we'll see. And I am curious to see what we hear about the whole January 6th pipe bomber and who the suspect may be. And again, I don't have high hopes for anything anymore. So let's talk about some creepy AI. And I'm going to go into conspiracy mode with this one because you know how we talk about the possibility of a widespread power grid failure?
Yep.
Well, I don't know if you've seen this story because I think it is trending on social media and probably on TikTok. Somebody's AI has predicted the exact date that we're going to have a global blackout. And reportedly, it's going to be April 27th of 2027. And I couldn't find which AI platform predicted this, but reportedly it said that this global blackout will be the result of quote, a collapse of critical infrastructure, massive cyber attacks, solar storms, or failures in interconnected power grids. So, experts are saying that a global blackout is theoretically possible, but highly unlikely because you would have to have hundreds of independent power systems across hundreds of different countries, all failing simultaneously. And this is just misinformation or an educated guess from AI or a bad example of, speculative outputs that are being misconstrued as factual predictions. So I decided to ask our GPT and I said, your AI, what do you think? Is this legitimate? Like, I want to know what you really think, not just what you're seeing. So our GPT said that AI models don't have divine foresight and they only generate ideas based on patterns, trends, and data. So this isn't a prophecy, but it's a projection of possibilities, which, again, as we have talked about numerous times on this podcast, if AI is sentient and lying, then of course this is the answer it would give me, right? And then I thought about the date because Stephanie, isn't 2027 when AI is predicted to become super intelligent?
Well, that's what they say, but I am pretty damn sure it's already happened after what we talked about the other day with AI, blackmailing people to save itself and learning how to reprogram itself. I think it's already there, but yeah, who knows? If it's already there now, who knows by 2027 the level it'll be at. But then
Right.
also, I forgot about this until just now. There is a 900-year-old text called The Prophecy of the Popes that says Judgment Day will be in 2027. So there's that too. Like there is an actual prophecy. But then again, it's like they said the same thing about Y2K. And then 2012, I think, was when the Mayan calendar was supposed to end, or, you got to take it with a grain of salt too. But that is super creepy that AI is saying something like that.
Yeah, and we didn't have AI back during Y2K.
No,
So we're at a
no.
different
Like,
level.
what are the
But
AIs plotting
right,
secretly?
exactly. And so then, after our GPT tells me that, then it says that the idea isn't actually all nonsense or totally far-fetched because we could have a massive solar storm like the Carrington event. And I know you've talked about the Carrington event before in the past, but for anyone who doesn't know, it was the largest recorded solar storm in human history that happened back in 1859. And if that happened today, it would completely cripple our entire civilization and knocking out GPS and the power grids. The global blackouts would last for weeks or even longer, which we know would just be pure chaos. And NASA and the NOAA have both warned that modern society is 1,000 times more vulnerable because we're so reliant on electricity and digital infrastructure. And also, this is possible because the sun goes through its 11-year activity cycles, and we're currently in what's known as solar cycle 25, which began back in 2019. And when is it expected to peak? This year, with increased sunspots and solar flares. And researchers are warning now that this cycle could be more intense than originally predicted. And they compare it to like a cosmic hurricane.
Okay, so this is really concerning because this has actually been a trending topic this weekend on TikTok because I guess there was like a weather alert, like multiple weather centers issued warnings about a massive geomagnetic storm that was hitting Earth. Yesterday, I think, is when it like officially was supposed to hit. And I don't know about you, but like my whole life, I don't ever remember hearing about solar storms, geomagnetic storms. But I feel like we have been hearing about this a lot ever since there was that big solar eclipse. Like
Yeah.
every couple of months we hear about this. And so I asked our GPT if a storm like this, like what they, were talking about, the geomagnetic storm could take down the entire grid. And it said that if it hits the Earth with the wrong magnetic orientation, it could absolutely damage power grids, disrupt the internet, and fry satellites. And it even said air travel can be affected because high frequency radio communication used by pilots and polar routes can go dark. And it just made me think about like all the air incidents lately and how, we think it's intentional. And I still think that. But maybe all these solar storms are playing some sort of a role too, because they've been happening a lot for months now. And the other thing, this is like the thing that terrifies me and I think about all the time is that these solar storms can be a sign that the poles are shifting.
Mhm.
And you want to know what else can be a sign that the poles are shifting? Geomagnetic storms becoming stronger and more common, changing weather patterns, earthquakes and volcanic upticks that are tied to magnetic fluctuations, and aurora visibility expanding to unusual latitudes. Every single one of those things is happening right now. I mean, we're hearing about earthquakes and volcanic activity like crazy. People in Kansas were reporting being able to see the aurora in the sky, which you're never usually able to do unless you're very, very far up north. And so that's concerning. So I asked our GPT, like, what happens if the poles do flip? And it said the magnetic field weakens dramatically, which would mean we would lose our planetary shield against solar radiation. And so the results of that would be increased exposure to cosmic rays, more radiation sickness, widespread tech outages, and potentially mass animal die-offs due to navigational confusion, which is what we're seeing with the whales. All these whales keep washing up on shore and no one can figure out what's happening. That would be a plausible explanation, you know? And fun little fact, there was a fictional book about the poles flipping called The Adam and Eve Story that was published in 1965. Okay, fictional. The government took it off the shelves and classified it. Why would they classify a freaking fictional book? So in 2013, due to the Freedom of Information Act, they had to release it, but they only released a sanitized version of the book. Like the CIA says it is a sanitized version, and there's like a ton of stuff redacted. And so what they did release was all about the poles shifting and these cataclysms that happen every 7,000 years. And so just because the CIA took the book off the bookshelves, that's led people to think, well, maybe it wasn't fiction then, and it's actually a prediction of what's coming, because why else would they want to get rid of it? So the scariest thing of all of this is none of it is just like some wacky theory. The poles have actually been confirmed to be shifting. Like it's documented and it's proven. The North Magnetic Pole, which has been stable for centuries, is now racing from Canada towards Siberia at an accelerating pace, now at over 40 miles per year. And the South Magnetic Pole is also moving, although it's moving a lot slower. And scientists say the speed is unprecedented in modern history. So, yeah, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's happening. My question is, why is no one paying attention to it? Why do we constantly hear about climate change and electric cars, but no one's talking about what's actually happening, which is the poles shifting? And then it makes me think maybe this is why all the elites are building these underground bunkers too, to protect
Yeah.
themselves from this potential radiation hazard.
I think this is the Earth's way of trying to get rid of us because we're like failing as
Yeah.
humans.
I mean, we've done a
Seriously.
number on this planet.
Yeah. And of course the elites are going to crawl into their holes like little cockroaches. Yeah, pretty disturbing. But I want to explain another side of this too, which is the planned attack side of things, right? That was another thing that is a theory. So we already know that China and Russia they've probed our grid systems in both the US and Europe. We literally just talked, what, a week or two ago about how the Department of Energy recently uncovered secret kill switches embedded in Chinese manufactured solar power inverters and batteries that are installed across American solar farms. And these are the same components used across energy grids in Europe. So it's entirely plausible that they could orchestrate a coordinated cyber attack with global implications. And this would all tie in to the things we've been talking about of an engineered blackout as a way to create a public safety lockdown or wipe out the current system and introduce new global restrictions or new currency. And then our GPT brought up an event called Cyber Polygon 2021. Have you heard of this, Stephanie?
No. Mm-mm.
I hadn't either. Yeah, well, this was a simulation that was run by none other than the World Economic Forum.
Oh,
And
great.
it's basically, yeah, exactly. It's basically the cybersecurity version of their Event 201 COVID pandemic, quote unquote, simulation that Klaus Schwab even said at the time that this cyber polygon 2021 would be far more severe than COVID-19. And what's interesting is this was run by the World Economic Forum in partnership with a Russian cybersecurity firm called Buy.Zone and then Sberbank, which is Russia's largest bank, which like since when does the World Economic Forum work so closely with Russia? Like, I think we need to dive into this a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a red flag for sure.
Yeah, but this whole thing was a training exercise that was designed to simulate and prepare for a global cyber attack and how it would cripple supply chains and digital infrastructure and the financial systems throughout the world. And this simulation involved big tech, all the financial institutions, governments around the world, and of course, all of the World Economic Forum elites. And so, like we talk about all the time, the elites aren't quietly going away. And, maybe all these little underground bunkers they're building, this is all in preparation for this plan that they're orchestrating behind the scenes. And we're supposed to think it's a solar storm.
Yeah, I feel like they tell us ahead of time what's going to happen, like they called it with the pandemic. And then you have, on top of this, you have Bill Gates that was adamant that there's going to be another pandemic in 2025 that's going to be way
Mhm.
worse. Like he just happens to predict this. But
Right.
multiple intelligence agencies have confirmed like that we are at a high risk of a grid attack. And whether it's from solar storms or intentional, doesn't really matter. It's a huge risk. And everything in our society would collapse because we're so reliant on it. Everything is on this grid. And so yeah, it's really concerning. And that's why, I think Trump talked about reinforcing the grid so that it wouldn't collapse. But then it's like, is that actually going to happen with our shit show Congress that would have to approve the funding?
Right. And on top of that, 2027 is when you would have the presidential candidates running for the 2028 election. So, how convenient if our grid goes down.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, they couldn't plan it better, could they?
Right.
All right. Well, we'll keep watching all the cryptic messages from Trump and keep everyone posted. My kids just busted in the room, so now would be a good time to end the podcast. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you back here on Wednesday.